Good evening, Canby, and welcome to another thrilling rendition of Canby Planning Commission. As always, we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Excellent. On to item number 2, which is the approval of the draft Planning Commission meeting minutes from our April 11th, 2022 meeting and the final findings for 1885 North Redwood Street annexation and zone change ANN 22-01/ZC 22-01. Are there, is there a motion?
I motion to approve.
It has been, is there a second?
I'll second.
It's Judy.
Okay, so it has been moved by Commissioner Ellison and seconded by Commissioner DeRoche to approve the minutes of the April 11th meeting and the final findings for annexation. Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? It passes unanimously. Well, actually, Judy, did you vote yes or no?
I voted yes.
Okay. I just wanted to double check. I didn't hear anything. Okay, so with that, we will move on to item number 3, which is citizen input on non-agenda items. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on non-agenda items. Each person will be given 3 minutes to speak. Staff and the Planning Commission will make every effort to respond to questions raised during citizens' input before the meeting ends or as quickly as possible thereafter. With that, is there anybody in our pack? We have a packed audience tonight. Is there anybody in the audience tonight that has anything for citizen input? That's too bad. Anybody online? Do we have anybody online for citizen input? Okay, with that, we will go ahead and move on to item number 4, which is new business. And the new business is there is no new business. So with that, we will check off item number 4 as well. Our next item is a Planning Commission work session. I have a little bit to read through here. So the purpose of tonight's work session is to give the Planning Commission an opportunity to discuss housing needs assessment and economic opportunities analysis updates. To make the most of the short time we are given for these meetings, public comment will not be taken at work session meetings. I know, folks, that's a bummer. Instead, we invite public. This is appropriate under Oregon Public Meetings Law. Instead, we invite public comment at all the Planning Commission regular meetings under either, under the one time that's dedicated to public comment. In addition, we invite the public to contact city staff with comments or concerns. Although this is a public meeting, the Planning Commission cannot make any formal decision in a work session. Next step actions are often determined for deliberation and discussion at a properly noticed Planning Commission meeting. So with that, we will go ahead and move into our work session, and I will hand it over to Don.
Good evening, Chair Padden and Commissioners. I wanted to give you an update on the housing needs and economic opportunity assessment work that's been done to date, and also it's going to continue into next year as an overview. Some of this is going to touch on the comprehensive plan process as well. We're already starting to schedule dates out into basically May at this point for this work, given there's some overlap between this and the comprehensive plan process. So let me start out just kind of with an update on the comprehensive plan process. The council has done a first reading of that for the comprehensive plan and transportation system plan. The second reading will be on December 7th for that, and that work is anticipated to start 30 days thereafter, which should be about January 6th for that work, and it'll parallel the housing assessment and the economic opportunity assessment work. They're kind of going hand in hand together. So just as an overview, I wanted to also touch on, there was a joint work session. I know several planning commissioners were not able to attend the October 19th joint work session, but there was a joint work session with council. There was also a council work session on November 2nd to go over housing and economic opportunity work that's been done to date, and also to get input from council and the planning commission during both of those sessions. So as an overview tonight, we're going to touch on a few things: the housing strategies, which are part of the housing production strategy work, which is wrapped into the housing needs analysis. There's a lot of acronyms here or terminology, but essentially the housing needs is kind of the macro piece, and housing production strategy is a strategy piece of that. There was discussion on low, medium, and high growth scenario preferences. Those have to do with employment and forecasting employment for the next 20 years. There was discussion on Canby's community development vision statement, and also on economic development objectives. So just kind of as an overview of what's to come and what's happened, we've had 2 work sessions addressing these items with Planning Commission and Council. We're going to dive right into the draft preparation of the housing production strategy, and this is an ongoing process. There's another Housing Advisory Committee meeting that will be happening in January. That's the 4th and final Housing Advisory Committee meeting. That's going to lead to a public meeting, which is an open house that will be in January as well, towards the end of January. There will be, in early February, final housing production strategy document prepared. That will go to the Planning Commission for hearing for adoption in March, and to Council in April. Similarly, on the economic opportunity side, these are really parallel. This is on the employment side. Again, same combined open house that's going to be happening in January to get public input. Also, that economic opportunity analysis is going to be finalized, it's anticipated in February, going to Planning Commission in March, and to City Council in May. And I mentioned before the comprehensive plan and transportation system plan starting out, and this is going to be the first 6 months of a 2-year process for the comprehensive plan. So we'll be going back and speaking with council again for the next fiscal year for the next piece of that work. And I'm going to go through some elements of this to kind of give you a breakdown of the comprehensive plan as well, in terms of what the macro bullet points are for each fiscal year. And so just that was a segue introduction there. And so for the first 6 months of this process, we'll be going through the initial tasks, which is a lot of community engagement for this: visioning, online surveys, stakeholder interviews, project advisory group, community events, Planning Commission and City Council updates, policy and plan regulatory review investigation, transportation existing conditions, transportation study framework, which gets into assumptions and standards, reviewing intersections and looking at the assumptions around levels of service, which I think is an important element. And we'll speak a little bit about that at the end of the hearing, or actually end of the work session tonight during the planning director updates, about some thoughts we have about transportation in particular, and engaging the Planning Commission in specific. So following that first 6 months, the next fiscal year would be July 1, 2023 to June 30th, 2024. There'll be continued public outreach, and there's essentially, we're going further into this process in the following year, doing community events, online surveys, community visioning, having project advisory, and a transportation technical advisory committee. So the technical advisory committee for transportation would start that next fiscal year, we'll be getting into scenario planning, which has to do with the urban growth boundary expansion issues related to the information we've received from our consultants on housing and employment and the need for how much land that would be for the next 20 years. There'd be preliminary draft comprehensive plan and transportation system plan goals and policies that would be established in that next fiscal year. And there'll be an urban growth boundary assessment and amendment submittal during that process, and system development charge updates. In the following fiscal year, which would be the last fiscal year anticipated, which would be 6 months, from July 1st, 2024 to December 31st, 2024. That would again be project advisory committee meetings, transportation system plan meetings, advisory meetings, planning commission, city council updates, finally the comprehensive plan and transportation system plan, and going through the adoption process with city council and the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners. We do need the county's approval as part of this as well, since there's an urban growth boundary expansion. Urban growth boundary expansion would be submitted, and there would be an appeal period. Some of that timing of that urban growth boundary expansion will be contingent on state review. The good news is the grants that we receive for housing and employment are from DLCD, Department of Land Conservation and Development. So theoretically, we should not have large surprises because they will be coming alongside of us through those housing and economic opportunity reviews. So we should know step by step, that we're, I think, in line with that process. These are complicated, however, urban growth boundary expansions are complicated, and it's important to have Department of Land Conservation and Development on our side. I think there's other elements that will come into play, though, in that process beyond the state. So there's a little uncertainty about the finality of this, but essentially after the urban growth boundary expansion is submitted for final review to the Department of Land Conservation and Development, there is about 120-day process, and if everything goes as planned, that would essentially be a final at that point. So jumping back, kind of really the focus tonight was kind of an overview to give you some background about where we're going. I wanted to talk about the housing needs analysis findings and just kind of give an overview to you as commissioners, since we'll be coming back to you for that in March for hearings on the housing production strategy and economic opportunity analysis. In March, there'll be hearings that we're anticipated the Planning Commission will be weighing in on. So the first thing is kind of why are we here and what are we looking at for the 20-year horizon of population. We just received final population numbers, adjusted population numbers from Portland State University. So essentially, City of Canby is about 19,000. We're just shy of 19,000 people. That's projected to increase by, according to Portland State University, by about 6,000 residents over the next 20 years. And so that's the number that we've been given by Portland State University, and that's the number we're working with moving forward with the housing assessment elements of this work. One of the items that I think is really important in this process is looking at the demography of the city and residents and ages of residents. And also looking at that in regard to housing affordability and looking at product type of housing, residential housing product type, and the importance of having diversity in housing product type to also have diversity in demographics, and without adjustments for those housing product types to make them more affordable, we're forecasting a fairly older population in 20 years versus one that currently exists. Canby housing needs were identified by our consultants as needing about 2,236 dwelling units over the next 20 years. That's broken into, the largest chunk would be single-family detached housing, which is largely what you guys have been seeing. Council members or commissioners have been seeing. That's about 1,384 single-family detached units. There are a variety of other housing types there that are manufactured homes and cottages. There's a need for those, as well as townhomes and plexes and multifamily. So the composite really is roughly 2,200 units over 20 years. And so there's an analysis piece here that, trying to minimize this here. There's an analysis piece that I wanted to go through. So if all the developments in the planning pipeline move forward, those would be all the subdivisions that are in process or that are going through the process or have been approved. If all of those go through at once and are all built out, or at least there's building permits issued for those, there's about 146 acres deficit in acreage that would be needed beyond the current urban growth boundary of the city of Canby.
So 146 acres more needed than what is currently
Within the urban growth boundary and within.
annexed and unannexed.
That's correct.
Okay.
So those 2,200 and change units would need the 146 acres to accommodate that. So the part of that analysis is we're going to be going through this process as the state, not to get too deep into this, but the state is pretty conservative about how they treat what is vacant land. And so they treat vacant land as anything that did not have a building permit on it. So you could theoretically have subdivisions that are in process or platted with lots available. Without a building permit, they're considered vacant. So that's one of those elements of the 146 acres will have to get reconciled with that. So if there's subdivisions that don't have houses or building permits on them, that number, the 146, could come down slightly. But that's the raw number, assuming that essentially everything in the pipeline is in process, either built or in process with a building permit. So kind of broad brush here on the overall elements that relate to housing demand and affordability is a housing product type does really influence, obviously, the affordability. There's definitely a mix of housing types needed to meet the projected demand and affordability in Canby over the next 20 years. Attracting younger families to the community will require a variety of housing product types: smaller single-family, townhomes, condos, cottages, and apartments. In design standards, as we've heard through hearing processes and just recognizing that as planning principles, design standards are very important. I think a lot of perceptions are related to perhaps product types where people have seen designs that are not as appealing perhaps to them. And so design standards, as we go forward, this will be addressing future code changes, those kinds of things are really going to be essential. That I think in actually showing different product types, and I would anticipate that as we go through the housing process here, we'll be looking at those characteristics of those product types, and those will be related to zoning. I'm going to get to that in a little bit here about, we won't be doing a deep dive on zoning, but we'll be talking about strategies, and then the strategies will lead to changes in zoning code, which is the next step. And so I think part of that, and that's the last bullet there, is that really the strategies are the first part of that process to identify those, to move forward, to make the effort to make housing more affordable. There is a housing crisis throughout the Northwest. It's probably not just here but across the United States. And it's really not showing signs of being a lessened situation. So it's part of that process. We're trying to do what we can to create that housing, more affordable housing product types, and to encourage, again, the continued demographics of the city. So you have, everything from school-age children through high school, and a variety of people here that with different age groups. So housing policy considerations, kind of the leading up to the strategies to meet future housing needs. These are items that the State Department of Land Conservation and Development come up with as tools in the toolbox. This toolbox is quite large in terms of all the elements there, and so we've asked the Planning Commission and Council to narrow those down, along with the Advisory Committee, to narrow down those elements to ones that we would like to focus on further. And I'm going to go into those, but it doesn't mean that that list is complete. In fact, it's still open for suggestion, and that would be part of what I'd like to hear from the commissioners tonight. So the housing policy strategies, there are some that have been already implemented. One of those is House Bill 2001, which is shown in A2, Revised Development Code, to allow duplexes. That's something the state has required. We've implemented that code. So far, we've not really seen that kind of product type here, and there's not been a real big push for that. But that is one of the tools in the toolbox. The other ones are identifying developing criteria and process for identifying land to upzone. Those may be limited areas, but for example, those could be along 99 where you have commercial zoning that might be on the south side of 99 where you would allow residential units above those. They're allowed on the north side. But for example, that would be one of those things to look at zoning along corridors with good transportation, close to schools perhaps. So that's kind of a limited area. The other one would be allowing cottage clusters, and those are things that need to be explored further about having different housing sizes kind of clustered together. Sometimes those are with open space, sometimes there are amenities that go with those, but again, the product types of that would be shown as we go through this process further. Multi-family residential buildings in downtown, something like, anything from the Dahlia to other Dahlia type of structure to other types of multifamily. Expand mixed-use zoning with inclusionary zoning and allowing for a mix of different housing types. That's not something we've seen a lot of in Canby, but I think there's many other areas that I think have done it quite well, and it works well, and I think it meets the requirement, or meets the needs of a lot of folks, and also looks at the ability to have different things from townhomes to, detached housing to different types of products that may be in the same area or adjacent. And then designs to promote aging in place, which I think is going to be more and more important just with the aging population and the baby boomers kind of going through that process. That's an important element as well. Both retirement centers as well as providing other opportunities that may be part of that process, as well as just looking at homes that may not be two-story. So those are the kinds of things that would be part of that. There's additional strategies here under B2, which would reduce minimum lot sizes in single-family zones with design guidelines. These could be lot averaging or other floating densities that we would talk about further. Identify opportunities to streamline plan unit developments. And I think plan unit developments, our code is rather weak on this in terms of really promoting plan unit developments. We don't see a lot of those, but I think that a lot of times here is a common amenity of some open space, and how do we promote that more, and again having a mix of housing types. And then B7 and appropriate zones, lower off-street parking requirements. Obviously in the downtown area, parking requirements they're not required to have parking in downtown, but looking at areas like downtown related to that. And then under financial strategies, identify high priority infrastructure projects, and those would be like the Walnut Street extension and others that would maybe promote the type of development that we're looking for that ends up fulfilling the need for housing as well as employment. And then under financial incentives that encourage developers to build planned unit developments, provide density bonuses for affordable housing. That would be part of that discussion process is what does that look like? Modify system development charge fees, and those may be scaled on the size of a home, for example, and right now there's no scaling. So a large home and a medium-sized home are paying the same rate. Then under F, under incentives and partnerships, monitor residential land supply and housing inventory. That's something we are doing, and the state requires us to do that as well on a yearly basis. Develop partnerships with nonprofits. That's an item that's important as well as we continue through this process, as not only the ones that where we've established connections, but how can we further expand those? Tax exemption and abatement of nonprofit low-income rental housing exemptions is another item that came out through the discussions with the advisory group and through discussions through Planning Commission and Council. And then the custom housing policy considerations, community outreach, I think is going to continue to be an element that's important. And that's something we've done and we're going to continue to do, and we've conducted development barrier audits, and I think we'll continue to be doing more of that as well. But those are items that are important as a baseline. Update housing needs periodically, which we're obviously doing. That's something we're assessing right now, but as we continue to go forward with this, it's going to be important. Education for property owners and developers, as to, I think that's the key issue as we go through this process and the comp plan. And amend the commercial zoning to permit mixed-use commercial housing developments was another element that I think there could be more corridor planning on 99. Those kinds of things would be part of that. So then on the draft economic opportunity, that was housing. So on the employment side of things, this is a map that is fairly hard to read, but it does, the gist of this is there's a lot of projects that are in pipeline, what we call pipeline projects. Those are residential projects as well as commercial and industrial projects. These are land approvals that have happened in the city, and you can see that the zebra stripe there, there's a lot of land that's essentially in that process, and although that's not considered absorbed by the state in terms of the buildable lands process, we are making note of that in terms of a real inventory, we're looking at that issue as well. The state really only recognizes a building permit as being something where it's occupied. So there's employment growth strategies, and there's 3 of them. There's low growth strategy, which is called safe harbor. That would be less growth than we've had. That the overall job growth generally equates that it assumes industrial job growth drops by 50%, results in a much slower job growth in the last 10 years. There's a medium growth scenario, which is industrial job growth is consistent with the past 11 years of growth in Canby. This is more consistent with what Canby has experienced. And then there's, like it's identified there, more likely growth scenario based on Canby's history and emerging trends. And then there's a high growth scenario, which is like the medium scenario, but reflects some aspirational objectives aimed at optimizing family wage jobs and service jobs with prime industrial sites and enhanced visitation and amenities. And that would also address things like, added attractions such as hotels and sports complexes. So through the advisory group process, the advisory group was recommending medium growth scenario, but not factored into that was the fact that the state came back on, we were assuming that the pipeline projects were in fact going to be considered to be consumed land, that because they've gone through the land use approval process. And that's not how the state's looking at this, so it probably is undercounting the amount of need for growth in the future. So the council was supportive of a medium to high growth scenario, and there's not a huge difference between medium and high. They sound a lot like there's a huge difference, but it's not a great amount of acreage, but so that's really kind of where the council landed as a supported item. So again, kind of what does that mean, and breaking that down in a quantitative manner. You can see those that we have in the, industrial shortfall in the medium forecast of 437 acres, and the high it's 474. In the medium, we are 6 acres short, and in the high, we are 16 acres short on the commercial. So somewhere between medium and high is kind of what's been landed on to date. And this again would be land that's not currently in the urban growth boundary. And this is based on forecasted employment based on historical trends. So economic policy discussion. These are items in 2013 that came out of that discussion and were acknowledged that they are still relevant today, which, maintain quality of life for residents over the next 20 years, quality of job creation, improve overall tax base, vital and active downtown, Highway 99 corridor treatment, well-designed range of housing types, neighborhood safety and livability, and improved pedestrian connections. There was also a vision statement that came out through the advisory group and was vetted through Planning Commission and Council. And this is Canby. This is the vision statement. Canby shall retain and enhance its unique sense of community and livable neighborhoods. Canby continues to be a great location for business to thrive and expand. Canby's downtown is inviting and safe with innovative businesses that meet the community's needs. Canby's employment centers attract a diverse mix of businesses that offer quality jobs and benefits. The Highway 99 corridor is designed as a safe and attractive gateway that invites visitors to explore Canby. City of Canby proactively plans for and invests wisely in infrastructure and services that enables the community to manage growth in a sustainable manner. It's a lot of words. It probably could be pared down a little bit, but that's kind of the gist of the vision going forward. So the next item was economic development objectives kind of going forward beyond, and these are ones that came out of the advisory group and through Planning Commission and Council vetting. Enhance Canby's positive business environment, plan for industrial expansion areas east and north of Molino Road, retain and attract businesses that provide quality jobs with high levels of employment per acre, provide incentives for targeted job creation and major private investment, support expansion in health services, support workforce training and development, expand lodging options, fund roads and infrastructure using innovative techniques, support arts and visitation, including agri and bicycle tourism, attract downtown development with integrated mixed-use buildings, and update design standards, and provide incentives for building renovations. So those are the objectives that were defined. And so kind of the gist of this whole exercise is, although this has not been like formally voted on and adopted, but there was support from council to move forward with the housing strategies that we went through relatively quickly. There's support from a medium to high employment growth rate, and support for the community development vision statement, and support for economic development objectives. So with that, that was a lot. If you have questions or what I would like to seek from the planning commission would be your questions, and then if there are things, I'm going to jump back here, think tangibly to the strategies that you feel we have missed something or that you'd like to see something further explored. And obviously the planning commission will be involved in all the steps involved in this, dealing with the adoption of the housing production strategies, and that's going to be part of this process. There'll be a report you'll see, and there'll be a full-on hearing for that as well. There'll be a joint work session as well on that, so before we get into it. So with that, I felt like there's a lot to take on here, and we're going to split these into two. We intentionally are going to do housing first, and then employment as hearing items, because it's a little much to do them both together.
Okay. So now you want feedback.
We want feedback, yes.
Okay. So with that, we'll go ahead and get things started on this one, which is category A, zoning and code changes. We have some stuff listed here. Oh, let me turn this on before Gordon comes out. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to reviewing all of this. And we're going to start with category A and get some input from the planning commissioners. Was he coming out to tell me that I got him.
He was.
So quick. So we have some items listed here. And we'll, with this one, we'll start with Commissioner Jarosh. Do you have any feedback or comments on this one? Things you'd like to add?
Yes, just a little bit though. It's funny, we were just talking about this here in Arizona because we have so many friends that are moving here. And we talked about why that is. Part of it's climate, of course, and taxes. But, you know, there are planned communities here that just don't seem to exist in Oregon. That none of us could think of one. We were talking about it over Thanksgiving, you know, where you have a place where you have typically people that tend to be affluent and you have a lot of amenities and, you know, you've got lots of, you know, it's for active living. And so we were saying, you know, why isn't anybody in Oregon doing that? So maybe that's an aging in place thing. I don't know, but I've never heard of any type of, outside of like California, Arizona, I've just never heard of any type of big planned community like where we live here in Arizona. I've never heard of one in Oregon, ever.
Commissioner Jarosh, there are a few that are out there there's some in Hillsborough, there are some in the Gresham area. There are several of them. They are not getting a lot of attention, perhaps. Part of what we're trying to do is have development code tools that would encourage that.
Okay.
That's really what this is about. You know, I think developers will develop what the code allows them to do, and sometimes it's important to push that envelope to say, you know, there's incentives here to do different things, and that's much better for the community if they do those things than they have traditionally done, perhaps, in fulfilling that. So really kind of what I'm getting to is not everyone is going to be able to afford an executive style home. And that is probably what the people moving into Canby are buying. So it's that's the kind of, and that's one aspect of that, but I feel like the tools perhaps are not as good as they could be to promote those kind of more planned communities.
Yeah, it's interesting, just to finish real quickly, the town we live in, half the town is very family oriented and lots of new subdivisions that all have 2-story homes and lots of playgrounds, and then the other half is the 3,000 home community where we are. And it really adds interesting diversity to the town and how the town is supported. You know, you got a lot of ex-executives here that do a lot of volunteering. You also have this week in particular, everybody's grandkids are coming into the community, and that's because they've the people have chosen to move here because their children and grandchildren live nearby, and they want this lifestyle. So anyway, it's just interesting. Thanks.
And Wilsonville's another example again, and again, I'm not suggesting that like, there may be elements of that people don't want to. I think it's important to explore those and to come back with, visually, what does this look like, and functionally, what does this look like, so that it's not something that's so scary. But I think, like you're saying, it's when you see those and they're well planned out, and there is essentially a diversity of ages, et cetera, it works pretty well. And that's something we think is important to look at.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, with that, we'll move on to Commissioner Ellison.
So just for some context, since I'm the freshman commissioner, the whole purpose of this is we're being compelled by the state of Oregon to produce the analysis and then what is possible. And we are also being compelled to report the total potential build out, because I'm assuming that fits some sort of metric that they measure for the state's success in solving homelessness.
And it's not necessarily just homelessness. It's you're right. And there's the two elements of this are, even without the state's encouragement of the housing needs analysis, which is required for cities of certain population, and Canby is one of those. So we're required to address that. Ironically, we're also doing a 20-year comprehensive plan update. So they marry pretty well together. Would you naturally address those same issues in a comprehensive plan update? Largely, I would say yes, you would. The state has just put some sideboards on that, and they're saying, how are you doing this as a strategy? Strategy is being measured over about a 7 or 8 year period of time, which is a long period of time. So it's not necessarily a heavy hand here, but there's also a realization of what does this community want to look like in 20 years? Do you want it to be still diverse in terms of population and age groups? Or is it going to largely be an older retirement community? So these decisions we make now will be significant in 20 years for what this community looked like. So yes, there is this kind of push by the state because there is this crisis situation. The legislature in Oregon has been pretty aggressive about trying to figure out how do we get our hands around this in a free market situation, which is super tough to do when the market's there. And so it's not necessarily to say they're mandating this. What they're saying is there is a toolbox. Would we look at the toolbox anyway? Yes, we would. I think part of that is what they're saying is you at least need to have some tools in your toolbox to address affordability to the degree that you're trying to make a difference.
And I'll just throw out there too, just for clarification, whether you're a junior commissioner or not, or counselor or not, something to keep in mind is it has been over 20 years since the city has gone through this plan. And once we're through this, it will be another 8 to 20 years that it will go through it again.
Right.
So this is what we are starting, this path that we are starting down is something that is very much outside of the norm of what the scope, what these groups usually do. So whether you're new or
Right.
or whatever to this, everybody is in the same boat.
But what Dawn was describing was that the decisions that are made in the more immediate time frame, those are going to be essentially the architecture for what will
Correct.
play out in 20 years.
It will, and I think that's, I think this could, the shape of that obviously will depend on what the options are to develop, how to develop land. The city is really not in control of private land. I mean, all we can do is really essentially steer that in a way that meets those objectives, which I think legitimately are important. It's not to say that we want to create, housing, attracting housing that's one type that is just, I think there's still a range of housing product. What we are seeing now, though, is largely large single-family homes, detached. If that's all that happens in the future, that will create a different paradigm than something that has more diversity to it.
Well, so walking this down a little further, the issues of eminent domain, those are things that come up. That's why I'm asking how compulsory is this from the state, and are we going to have to be faced with as a city in order to comply with something from the state, that we face issues of eminent domain of private property owners?
I don't think this has nothing to do with eminent domain.
It doesn't, and these are really, they're strategy level items, essentially what they are.
Okay.
So this is not, the state's not saying you have to have a certain amount of housing at this value, at this value, at this value. It's, I think what we're recognizing through this process, and there's been a ton of information produced by the consultants, is that even the residents here, there's a sizable portion that are struggling, that are existing Canbyite
Sure.
residents that are struggling to pay rent or to afford housing.
Right.
If they can't afford that, that's part of the fabric here, is like, what does that look like? And is there a way that the city can help with the affordability factor to the extent a government agency can do that?
Well, an eminent domain, as I understood it, does apply to infrastructure if it means they need access through somebody's property to achieve some other goal, some other stated goal. And so that's where I'm like, okay, which way is this trending? This is truly something driven by what do we as citizens want the city to look like? And oh, by the way, we happen to be required to report the metrics to the
And that's
state.
pretty much
Okay.
what you're saying there is a fair characterization.
Okay.
We have an issue. We've defined the issue and said this is the demographics of this community. We've defined the issue of those that cannot afford, existing residents that cannot afford housing or are struggling with housing. And we've defined the issue of what the market is in the area and for those housing costs that people coming in and buying homes. Should that look different? That's the question for this community, is what should that look like?
Sure.
Should it, when we're dealing with, especially when you're dealing with vacant land and land that might be brought into the urban growth boundary, like what should that look like? And should it have a different way of looking than, or should it have the opportunity to look differently, with maybe more of a mix of uses, maybe like Judy was talking about planning communities. Could that be something that would be part of that process to address some of those needs in a variety of ways? So it wouldn't be necessarily like you shall build apartments, because that's not what this is about. But is there a way to promote a more integrated situation like the north side of town, which has not been annexed, and along 99. The comp plan, ironically, from 1984 even talks about that being mixed use. So that's the last comp plan. So I mean, again, those are decisions that we need to fulfill the need for the housing that for the 6,000 folks that come here no matter what. We are absolutely need to do that. How that's done in terms of what kind of, we're also dealing with urban growth around expansion. Should land that's legitimately brought into the city, should that have an aspirational objective to it that fulfills some of those items?
And again, only because we're talking about the immediacy of the planning stage of it, as opposed to the implementation over the course of potentially 2 decades, right? With the changing of city councils throughout all of that, how do we as a body find our way through those decisions? So for example, this process started, with the previous council makeup. Now there's a new council makeup. I'm sure there's going to be another new council makeup. So how do you through a process that takes 6 to 8 years with a ton of different potential people coming on and off of council.
It'll be more immediate than that. I mean, that's what the state is saying. We want you to do implementation, hopefully have something, code changes in the next 7 to 8 years. I would imagine this comp plan and zoning for those areas would be more like in the 3-year time period. So like.
And I'm just going to jump in here to say that I think what we're getting at is with a plan like this, you want it to have some staying power. You want it to be able to provide a roadmap for the city over a period of time. So by creating this plan now, it provides a roadmap for future city councils and future planning commissions, so that regardless of how those boards and such change, they have some information about what the previous ones were thinking to provide a larger roadmap and an education on that process. So like, it is not likely that we'll go through this process and in 5 years a city council or a planning commission will come in and say, well, we don't like this, we're going to completely change this all around. That really can't happen. Once this sort of provides that roadmap, correct me if I'm wrong, there can be tweaks here and there along the way when you do your check-in, but this is the plan for the future. And I think too, one sort of as far as how this will work is for these zones, right now we have R1, R1.5, R2 different. We may decide that we need another type of zone or multiple zones, and we may feel that we need to expand, high density residential in this area and shrink, and move those colors on the map around. And that is all what will come of this review.
And just maybe part of that, it's a great question. I mean, and I'll let Ryan speak on this as well. But we'll have advisory groups, a lot of communication with the public. I mean, part of this is an educational process. We've not done this for 38 years. But I think
38.
So, I mean, in terms of a holistic review, there's been some minor things, but like we haven't asked the question, what's the vision? Which is part of this process for, we know what the deficit is. We know what that is. And I think part of that is taking that community input, having the planning commission and city council involved obviously is really critical, and going through this exercise together. This is a 2-year process to update the comprehensive plan. It's not going to happen overnight, and there's a lot of steps involved in that. Some of that, there'll be early steps in this process. So your question is a good one, which let's start out with the basics, like what are the level of service standards, which means how congested, are the standards correct now, or should they be different? That'll influence what we're doing in terms of like how development happens on the land. And then to Chair Padden's point, with urban growth boundary expansions, if we're expanding, employment lands or lands for residential, we have a fairly limited zone categories here in the city. We have 3 residential zones and essentially two industrial zones. Should there be more different types of zoning? Should there be zones that allow employment and housing, for example? I mean, I'm not sure what that mix is, but we have the opportunity to really cast this in a way that I think would be something that the community could embrace. So it's not really so much a mandate as it is. This is it's an opportunity. I mean, this is as scary as planning is, but for people that change happens, but this is your opportunity to input into this process and be part of it, because growth is going to happen. Even if we don't do this, growth is going to happen. It probably is not going to happen any better, probably will happen worse without planning.
So I agree with that. 2 final points. One is anecdotal. I saw planning take effect in Beaverton, and it was interesting to see the one development in particular from right behind our neighborhood, which was our neighborhood was a single detached tract neighborhood. The lower income rental community that went up. It was like 5 stories or whatever, 4 stories, and they project X amount of people per unit. And what we found was that it was a lot more than that because you had a lot of roommates and a lot of street parking, and so it was a much bigger impact to that neighborhood than originally was sold. So that was always something that is in the back of my mind. But then also, what standards or what metric do we use to ensure that we have enough police and fire? One cop per how many citizens, or one firefighter per how many citizens? Does that factor into this? And where does that, if so, where does that cost get built in? How does that work?
Another great question. So the comprehensive plan has a capital facilities element, and part of that would be looking at city services, and obviously fire is an important one. Although they're a district, they're not really part of the city.
Oh, gotcha.
So, but I think that's a really good question. 6,000 people. I'm not sure what the ratios are, but in terms of what that is, again, those people are not all moving in year one here.
Right.
I mean, but great question, and the other part of that is, I think schools are not in a situation where they're necessarily bust into the seam. In fact, they're flat or perhaps declining here, as I understand. So I think, all those are important as we go through this exercise, and that would be part of that process, would be capturing that. So not only utilities, water and sewer and electricity, but also looking at police and fire and, schools, those kinds of things would be part of that process as well. So that's all part of that. So you're not overwhelmed. And I think to the extent of there's really no hidden agenda here where, I don't think we're even comparative to Beaverton or ever will be.
We don't have enough land.
Yes.
I think the scale is different here, but I think part of that is, trying to get people's thoughts around this about, and it's difficult because I think everybody comes at this at a different perspective. And I think, part of that is, can we make it a little better on transportation, for example? Could we have a better jobs housing ratio? Instead of having thousands of people come and thousands of people leave and come in every day, could there be a different ratio? There might be a different ratio if housing was more affordable.
Yeah.
That's part of that discussion. Yeah.
And I will speak to the police side of things. So the police are a department within the city, and that is driven through the budget. I can assure you that the police is the largest item of the city's budget. They take up almost half of the available money outside of PERS and other things that we must pay. So I don't know what our ratios are, but that is something that as the population changes, those numbers come into the city administrator, and then during the budget process, they make those adjustments. I'm curious. I'm going to come to you. How difficult would it be to bring up the urban-rural reserve map for Canby?
Brian, do you want to? Sure. Navigate. I'm going to switch.
And while Ryan is working on that, we'll go ahead and move on to. Was that everything?
Yes. Thank
Okay, Mr.
you. Could I give one just one unsolicited aspect of kind of this question of, is the state mandating all these strategies, and are these coming from the state? I guess part of my perspective is, if a lot of these strategies turned into code for us, they would actually make it more permissive. Development more permissive. Even the ones on the screen, like upzoning land or allowing cottage clusters or promoting aging in place, which is like allowing different types of units and stuff. I think that trying to collect my thoughts here. I wouldn't think of this as like a list of like additional things that's going to make it harder for developers or the development community. I think it would actually, a lot of these would be opening up more things that they could do. Because like cottage clusters, our code's not really set up to allow that now. And so if we did choose that strategy, it's making it more flexible, not more restrictive.
And I think part of that is the geographies, which is the scenario planning. And I know the screenshot that we're sending through this is like giving you a whole year's worth of work in like 5 minutes. But the scenario planning will be about that as well, which is like where geographically, not saying that anywhere in the city you can have anything anywhere, but more specifically, what are the needs, and then where geographically would that make sense? I think that's part of that discussion as well. I don't disagree with Ryan, but I just didn't also want to say that like we're going to do a blanket zoning over the entire city, because that's not something that we're really looking at. It's like targeted, and where would that be positive? And you probably have developers and residents that would be interested in that, more so in some areas than in others.
I think if you just type urban rural reserve map in Google, that's how I usually find it.
Yeah, I think it's this one right here.
Well, and to Judy's point, I was down in Arizona for a while, and Del Webb has the most amazing planned neighborhood, and it has all of those things, but my gosh, that was like
Huge.
yeah. And couldn't something like that be smaller? Sure, I'm all for
It could be absolutely a smaller scale. It doesn't need to be hundreds of acres. It could be 20. It could be a lot smaller, but still be more planned.
It was extremely cool, I will say. That was awesome.
Hey, I have a quick question. It doesn't seem like everyone's using their microphone. And so for those
your
that
microphone
aren't,
isn't on.
it's really hard to hear you. And I assume on the YouTube, it'll be really hard to hear as well, just feedback.
Okay. So I just want to make sure everybody can see this map.
They can't yet. I'm about to.
Okay. So I want to cover this. I've talked about this from time to time, and I think this is important for folks on this bot. How many of you have looked at this urban rural reserve map? Commissioner Hutchinson, Commissioner Jarosh, have you looked at this before?
I'm sorry, I'm still having trouble hearing you.
Well, my microphone is on, so I don't know what to. I don't know. Have you seen this urban rural reserve map before?
Yes, I have.
Okay. So just to give folks an understanding here. So as we talk about the urban growth boundary plan or expansion, the area that's in gray on this map is what is currently in our urban growth boundary. And all the area that is outside of that is white on this map is land that has the ability to be brought into our urban growth boundary. All of the land in green is part of the rural reserve. This was a program that was put in place, 8 years ago or so? It was when I was on city council in 2010, 11. And all of that area in green is in the rural reserve and cannot be added into an urban growth boundary or annexed into a city for 50 years. So we are planning for 20 years out. If there needs to be 100 and some odd acres of land that gets brought into the city for this urban growth boundary, those areas in white are the only areas that land can come from. So some of the fear is that Canby's just going to grow all over the place, all over the farmland, and it's going to just be a mess. That is impossible because, as you can see, we are locked into a certain footprint for the next 50 years. So not only for this plan, but the plan that people do in 20 years from now will only have this amount of land to play with and potentially grow into. And I can assure you, when I was on council, this white area was a lot smaller. It was through the effort of the city council and the city staff at the time. Originally, Metro had planned to draw the line just where our urban growth boundary was. And there was going to be no extra land for Canby to grow into for 50 years. So if ever you are interested in learning more about where the city can grow, and if you're a landhold owner and where you fall into that grand scheme of things, I encourage you to look at this map and study it. So yeah, so this pocket here, this area here where the industrial park is, this goes up towards special area J, because special area J is in here, right?
Right.
Yes.
So this is outside of special area J, and then down here towards the Canby Ferry and out in this area. But as far as us being able to jump to Barlow, no. People talk about, jumping the river and coming, no, we can't, it's all locked up. There's this little bit here and this out there. So that's just something to keep in mind as folks think about these plans. And I think this is a map that you folks should really include in these things when you're doing the educational piece for folks, to try and take off some of the edge of people worrying that we're just gonna, pave over the farmland and, put up houses. So that's just that. Okay, so with that, Commissioner Hutchinson, do you have anything to add?
I do.
Okay.
Can we get back to our agenda? Okay, well, one thing that I can talk about that doesn't involve the list of items that we were looking at. When I had a friend who had a mixed-use home. It was a commercial storefront for her, and then she and her family lived above it. And it was designed and built as such. And it's still in use in Portland. I drive by it every so often. But you have to understand that the look and feel of it is definitely commercial. You do the commercial on the ground floor, kind of like you do with the Dahlia. And even though it's only 2 stories tall, it just doesn't really feel residential. But what's nice is it kind of cuts down on the, where you have a commercial neighborhood that evacuates at 6 o'clock every day. These you actually have people there, and it really cuts down on the crime rate and, things of that nature. So that is kind of a nice item. So included in this section would be, except for that no one has put it forward yet, lowering lot size requirements for R1. Would that be something that would be considered in this list of items?
It's one that could be added. I think part of that is, I guess it's under, maybe it is under B2.
I thought I
Yeah.
saw that as an item under
Oh, there
one
it
of
is.
them.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think there's some discussion about lot size averaging and those kinds of things that would be part of that. I mean, I think that is a tool.
We actually saw that in one development that we approved at one point, and they were asking for a variance for that, where I think every other lot was a little bit below our minimum lot size, and they had to explain to us that in aggregate, they ended up with the same houses, but what they were specifically trying to avoid was, cookie cutter houses, one exactly, the same, sitting on the same shaped lot, one after another. And, once they explained it to us that it was an aesthetic decision, I think a lot of people, went along with it. And some people like small houses. Some people have small families. I think that you can have a fully adequate R1 house that has, that is fairly small. And along those lines, maybe we could establish, a neighborhood with an additional zoning, where we relax lot sizes, but, try to keep all the other aspects of the R1. I'm really not sure that people are thinking in terms of what, kind of not thinking. I mean, the only place for your teenager to move to when they're 19, if they're not going to college, is your basement or out of town right now. And I'm not sure that we're willing to encourage development that kind of puts that in their hands. I think about the same thing about dishwashers at restaurants. People who are at that point in their economic lifespan, they have roommates, and that's the only way that they're going to be here. And if you make it so that they have to commute a long ways, they just won't, because it'll just be economically untenable. So that kind of population is important to the health of our community in a lot of of ways. And so, I encourage us to look at upzoning at every opportunity that we can. I really like the idea of upzoning specifically close to shopping. I just accidentally, my first house was across the street from a Safeway. And even though it was in a pretty risky place in Portland, it was really kind of a joy. And the one barrier that seems to really kind of trip everyone up is parking. And it's, it seems to come up every opportunity that it can. And am I correct in that I've heard in the past that we seem to have, even though, everyone builds the amount of industrial parking that we need, a lot of it tends to go unused?
On the industrial side, there will be absolutely a reevaluation as part of the transportation system plan update. And I believe in specific, our lens is going to be looking at, like the warehousing for one example. I mean, is that really needed? I mean, our parking ratios are super high. On commercial, I think we need to look at that more closely, and there may be a shortage of parking requirements in some commercial complexes. Housing seems to be, we're kind of in the middle on that, on housing. I don't think we're really high or low, we're kind of right in the crosshairs for right now. So, but I know parking is a real sensitive item in terms of like people's perception about parking and on-street parking in particular. That's something that will absolutely be evaluated as part of this process.
I had one more item, but I'll bring it up if I can remember.
Okay. So if you go back to that category we were talking about, for me, I am a fan of looking at diversifying our zoning types to allow the different different styles of building within the community. That is something where it seems like if a developer wants to do that now, they have to request a variance, and that muddies the process up, because a lot of times the planning commissioners don't understand what that really looks like and what that means. So I think that will help clarify stuff, will help clarify things for future folks that sit on this board. As far as any different types to add to this, I don't have anything to add. I think this covers pretty much all of those sections and things that would need to be done in order to make that diversification.
And just thank you. And just on that note, I mean, none of this is going to be a race to the finish here on this. So like what you'll see is this housing production strategies will get adopted. Then you'll see code, and the planning commission will see the code. The council will see the code, and full public work sessions, hearings. That would be absolutely part of that process. So, and again, that's not going to happen overnight, because some of the code changes really, we need to get far enough into the comp plan, because the reality is, like, especially if land is going to get brought in, that's because it's needed based on either housing demand or forecasted employment. The type of zoning there could be very much different than what we can tailor that to whatever we want that to be.
Yes.
And that could be part of the conditions of like agreeing to like bring the property in. I mean, that's really a different lever that we have than even like property that's already in the urban growth boundary. I mean, there's the shaping of that can be far more precise and far more detailed.
Yeah, and I think to this point of like having big planned communities and stuff here in Canby, we can't do it. We don't have enough. I mean, with the exception of over by the annexation that we did and stuff over there, headed towards Canby, heading down Canby Markham Highway or whatever, there's no one landowner that really has enough land to be able to do something like that. I mean, hundreds of homes, yes, but thousands of homes with, a rec center and community lawns and all this stuff. They're just, unless a bunch of landowners got together and decided they were going to do it all together. And the only thing I think that's even come close to that is out there behind me, where it was like 5 or 6 landowners that came in and decided to do that Is it Toft? No, I don't
Dodds.
think. Huh?
Dodds.
No, it's off the 10th and it's behind the Catholic Church there.
Oh, Northwoods.
Northwoods Estate, yeah, Northwoods Development. I mean, there was multiple people that did that, and there's not a lot of other places in Canby that really could happen. So, but no, for me, I think that covers things in that category. And Commissioner Hutchinson remembered what he was going to say.
Yes. So I've actually talked to members of council about this a little bit, informally, of course. And one of the things is that the kind of community that we are, which tends to be R1 houses, where we have a large number of people that leave and a large number of people that come in to work here and then leave again when the people who live here come back home, it influences their decision making when it comes to influencing our tax base. And one of the things that I have heard is that with a warehouse that doesn't employ very many people, it expands the tax base quite a bit, and it can help out with the infrastructure issues as we grow, but they're not generators of jobs, and so when you start thinking about that, it's like, are the jobs that we generate here going to be for people who live here, and there's really only so much that we can kind of push that around. Mm-hmm. But we do have to understand that decisions are being made based on us being a bedroom community. Mm-hmm. Right now, and there's really no ignoring it. And so if a diverse community is what you want and lower traffic on the roads is what you want, then we got to kind of make it possible for people to live here and not drive. And that means working here and living here, and that means a mix of housing that supports the kinds of jobs that are available here. And we don't really have that right now. So, looking in light of what we have for the amount of land we can expand into and create new rules for, those opportunities are limited. And so, we kind of have to look at the zoning that we have and the houses that are there and open up opportunities to infill when we can. I mean, I think that's really the only way that we're going to get where we want to go. And that people don't like to hear that. I mean, I've heard duplexes used as a threat or as an insult, at the commission meetings before. So, there's going to be, the education just isn't going to be about what's possible and where we're going. There's going to be a lot of why that we need to discuss. And, we're deciding how important it is and how horrible traffic is. And my goodness, the amount of time we spend on it. When we make these housing decisions, we're deciding what kind of traffic there's going to be in 20 years. Mm-hmm. And so it's hard to keep an open mind, especially when you're trying to remember or keep in place a Canby that is very ideal for you. But I also would like to remind everyone that there are a lot of people who prefer a Canby with sushi as opposed to a Canby that does not have sushi. And having been here through both of those times, I have to say, I'm pro Canby with sushi. So my point of comfort of the growth level of this town is quite a bit further along than people who've lived here their whole lives. Yeah. A lot of high school kids love the sushi. So I project some difficult and deep conversations going forward.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. So I think we've covered that topic. Let's go ahead and move on to the next category. Housing policy strategies. So we have some reduced minimum lot sizes, which was something that Commissioner Vice Chair Hutchinson had mentioned. Identify opportunities to streamline PUDs and in appropriate zones lower off-street parking requirements. So with that, as far as whether we think this is a good mix or whether you'd like to see something added or subtracted, we will start with Commissioner Ellison.
I need more time on it.
Okay.
Sorry. I'll have to think about it.
Okay. Commissioner Hutchinson?
Could you explain briefly before expanded a little bit for me?
I think part of that is twofold. One is having a planning and development ordinance that actually is encouraging to allow for or promote kind of this more master planned community type of development. And then, so if we have that tool, which the current PUD ordinance is lacking, that the idea behind that would be we would end up encouraging by the fact that you can either build A, which is like this is your traditional development, or B, you can do something different, and that may have a variety of housing product types in it that are integrated back to the smaller scale version of these planned communities, which is what a PUD essentially is. A PUD could be whatever we want that to be. We interchange these words, and we can draft an ordinance that's called a planning and development. It could be, we talk about mixed use. Mixed use often is a component of planning and developments. So it's about defining, providing opportunities to define that in a way that does in fact allow for more of that incentivized kind of development. So it would be creating planning and developments, the ordinances and those kind of, an ordinance, and it may be that we have different things, and it depends on what the tool ends up being. It could be an overlay. We could use an overlay, or it could be a planning unit development ordinance, or it could be, planning unit developments may not just be for residential. That's what we have now. And to be honest with you, I don't know if that really works as well to encourage that. Could it not be commercial, like the neighborhood store and residential, all in the same place? How cool would that be? Your kids get to ride their bike down to the store, safely in an area, which would be kind of neat, versus these exclusionary elements of, I've got residential and a barrier between me and the next zone or whatever. It's like, it's way more integrated. Streets are integrated, trails are integrated, parks are perhaps part of that process. Where it may be a private park, it could be a public park. It's those kinds of things of promoting that with developers to say there's an option here to do something that gives us a different product, provides more variety of housing type.
So like at the very bottom end of the scale, you could probably include the cottage concept. It would be like as one end of the continuum.
You could,
and then something like, I don't know, Eagle Crest would be the other end, like they have in Redmond, right? That big, massive planned community that, yeah.
And it would be townhouses. It could be, there could be apartments mixed in there. I mean, it
seems like we could capture the cottage concept in this and get all the way down from one property size up to a bunch of properties put together. And that kind of mixes in with the commercial residential thing, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, I think cottages in particular would play well to that, because that probably the folks that would live there would be more interested in that perhaps as well. So, I mean,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Jarosh.
No, I don't have anything. I think partly because I'm on the working committee for this, I've seen a lot of this material, so had more time to absorb it. Thanks.
Yeah, and I just do want to throw out too that these, what we're seeing here on the screen has not just been like cooked up tonight. This is the work of a consulting firm and months of work from a consulting firm as far as evaluating where we currently are, where other cities around us are going, what industry trends are hitting and going to play an impact on this, as well as a group of citizens and businesses and community leaders that have also fed into this that we are seeing now. So there's been already a ton of eyes and discussion on these particular categories. So I just want to double check. For me, I'm good. I think everything's good there that I see. I just want to follow back up with Commissioner Ellison. Did anything come to mind, or are you good for now?
I'm good for now.
Okay, in this first pass.
Yes.
Okay, so financial strategies. We covered these. You can see them on the screen there, and we will start with Commissioner Hutchinson.
This is a little out of my wheelhouse, but it all seems to make sense to me. When you talk about high priority infrastructure projects, we've pretty much done that already. I mean, haven't we?
Well, and I think what it come, let's say that the Walnut Street extension, which is on the horizon. I mean, that would be the type of infrastructure we're talking about, and I think that will create less. It'll create less congestion. It'll create better access and distribution. It will probably promote or incentivize at least that area developing, because roads kind of do provide incentives, especially if they're commercial in nature. And that's part of that piece of that. There could be other things that are done in the city. Transportation system plan would obviously be looking at that. I don't have anything, like right now to tell you what that is, but there could be something that comes out of that.
Well, I think where that might be coming from as well is that through the process of an urban growth boundary expansion, most of the roads that are brought in through that process are going to be county roads. And we're all very familiar with Redwood Street, North Redwood Street, and North Pine, and North Maple. And so all of those streets are going to need a significant amount of work to get them up to a standard. And, to me, I scratch my head over this, is that when I go to other communities that are developing out this way, around us, you drive through the countryside and there's, those roads, there's rotaries in the middle of like farmland, there's street lights, there's, widened streets, there's sidewalk infrastructure where there's no homes, and that's all in preparation for that coming. And Canby doesn't do that. Canby starts building the houses, and then we wait until the developer does the half street improvement and the sidewalks, and then that part makes no sense. So I'm hoping that is what is being captured in that C2 there. So sorry, anything else, Commissioner Hutchinson? Okay, Commissioner Jarosh.
Goodness, sorry. I don't have anything, thanks.
Okay. Commissioner Ellison?
I also share your zest for C2. I think it's kind of an issue unique to Canby compared to where we've lived before, where I haven't really seen that infrastructure piece go lead the charge and then development. So I'm all about that. I will say that, looking in the short term, the cost of money is very expensive right now. The trades are very expensive. Everything is expensive. And trying to find builders and developers willing to put up the money and the effort to do these projects, I think is quite challenging. So anything that we can do to incentivize the builders to build whatever it is that we decide as a community that we want them to build, I think is going to be good, because I don't think it's as easy to find builders to build projects as one would hope at this point. So, yeah, I think it's absolutely awesome if we consider incentives for builders to come here and build what we want.
Okay, excellent. And so for me, it looks like those pretty much capture. I'm not a huge fan. I think that I'm not a huge fan of giving a bunch of incentives for people to come in and do a lot of this stuff, I guess. I mean, I don't quite see. I mean, I think we're pretty easy to work with. I think even with our recent changes to our fees structure and all that stuff, it really puts us in the middle of the pack as far as cities around this area, and as far as the cost of building a development or those sort of things here. I think we're still pretty cheap. I think there's some things that we can do to make it more enticing. And going back to the first category, I think there's some things that we can do to make it more enticing for a developer to say, hey, I don't want to just build single family homes. I really would like to do some of these other things. And I can actually do that in Canby now. And that might entice those folks to come in. But really, as far as financial strategies go, I really want to see an emphasis put on that. I really like and want to see more of an emphasis put on this infrastructure aspect of things, where we think about that in the beginning, not as an afterthought, and really some sort of roadmap as to how we do that, because I don't think we don't do that now. And this is a classic case. I'll point to another classic case of this, is when we did the big development there, the Elk, what is it, the one down there off of Ivy Street, before you dip down into Mark's Place. On that map, it showed a rotary was sort of like shadowed in to say, with the traffic and stuff, we're going to need to do a rotary, and we're going to need to do some stuff in there. That rotary should be there right now. That rotary should be in there now. It should not be in there after all of those houses are in there. It makes absolutely no sense to me. So if there's anything that, could be put in here that really takes a look at that, I really think it needs to be in there. And now I will get off my soapbox. And we can move on to the next one. Am I wrong? Am I wrong? It just absolutely infuriates me.
I grew up in Hillsborough. Grids everywhere. And then there was this weird place called Brookwood where everything was roundy and turny and no straight lines anywhere. And I always got lost in there on my bike.
Yeah. Okay, so incentives and partnerships. So we have categories E and F. And recently implemented, we have the monitor residential land supply and housing inventory and develop partnerships with nonprofits. And then what's also being added is tax exemptions and abatements for nonprofit, low income, and rental housing exemptions. With that, we will now go back to Commissioner DeRoche.
No, I don't have anything on this one, thanks.
Okay, Commissioner Ellison.
Nothing to add right now, no.
Okay, Commissioner Hutchinson.
No, thank you.
For me, I was listening, I can't remember what I was listening to, and they were talking about how in some, it's not in Oregon, but in some state or some areas, the ability to approve or disapprove tax exemptions for like promoting buildings and such is done by like the level. So from how I understood it, it was like, okay, gavel, the great gavel company of USA. I'm gonna build this big building in your community, and I want tax exemptions to come in and do this, right? And it's like the state is like, great, we want you to make all the gavels for the U.S. here in Canby, and the county is like, great, we want you to do that in Clackamas, but Canby's like, we really need roads. So it's okay if the state and the county want to give you those tax exemptions, but Canby kind of needs that tax money. So we're not going to extend our portion of those tax exemptions to this development. Is that a possibility? How does that look like? What does that look like? Because to me, that is that seems like that's a very smart thing, in my opinion.
And I'll give you, that was a really long question, but I'll give you.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
My thought, I can't answer that in detail, but what I think the exploratory piece of this is going to be is tax credits. That's kind of what we're looking at is like, could there be a system that's developed, obviously needs to be vetted by planning commission through council, and under what circumstances would that be? So,
Okay.
But wouldn't tax credits fall under more of a legislative body as opposed to like more like a city council thing, or
it would, I mean, obviously, but everything we're doing is going through planning commission as a recommendation.
okay.
So, I mean,
I was trying to understand where the separation was going to
No,
be. On
exactly, and I think part of this is, I mean, you guys are a recommending body. I think it's important that you weigh in on things because ultimately you're gonna see them in implementation. And so that you understand, good, bad, or indifferent, like whatever the council decides, you will have weighed in on it and to some degree influence that decision. So, that's something that needs to get more detail about what that would look like in terms of, exemptions or, credits, those kinds of things. And I can't speak like a person that's an expert on this, but that would be part of that exploratory piece, to look at that.
Okay. Okay, so I guess that's it for that one. Now we're going to custom housing policy considerations. We have community outreach, housing needs focused, and conduct development barriers audit, which we're already doing. And now new things, we have update housing needs periodically, education for property owners and developers, and amend commercial zoning to permit mixed-use commercial housing developments. And with that, we will start with Commissioner Ellison.
Can you give some more scope to Z5? What does that mean?
I think really it's an ongoing piece, and this is, I mean, I think this will be part of our housing economic assessment and comprehensive plan process, which is what is the need and what are the choices? And then beyond that, I think another layer of that is once we start having that defined, and let's say that ends up being a promotion of, we all like planned unit developments, and we create a code for that, is, having those conversations with developers specifically saying, have you thought of this? Because it would be a lot better for you, I think, and us to do this kind of situation and development than it would be to do something different.
Okay. Thank you.
And some cities I know have created like toolkits and stuff that they can, circulate to builders and developers, like that really walk them through the process and give them examples of what it could look like. And that's because right now we mostly just lean on the code for what you can and can't do, but this is like a more proactive thing where you're providing them something that gives them the ability to pursue some of those more non-standard projects.
Marketing.
Yeah, and I really like what Ryan just said. I think,
Yeah.
Ryan, I think, and this is my observation, is that sometimes it's hard for people to look at something different. You've done something a certain way forever, and it's hard for people to there's a different path. Mm-hmm. And to Ryan's point, I think that's it. It's it's not untested waters and uncharted waters that you're just going to get, really beat up through that process, but rather this has been vetted and we want it to work well for both sides.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. That's it.
Okay. Commissioner Hutchinson?
So was the Dahlia just a single use? I mean, that was before my time. So was that kind of brought forth as the whole concept was a downtown mixed use facility? And was there any bad reaction to it when the idea first floated?
I think Jason might be able to speak to that. Before my time.
People were losing their minds when I mean, correct me if you were here for that. No? Laney was, yeah. So I was not on council or anything. I was just on the budget committee, but I can tell you that people, you would have swear that Sauron's tower was being built downtown here. It's like, what? There's going to be this like flaming eye on top of it. People were enraged.
Yeah.
And the thing that cracked me up was it was like most of that land was most of that land was owned by the city. So it wasn't even on the tax rolls. And so this was like city council's whole thing was like, oh, it's going to get it back on the tax rolls, although there's a whole nother story behind that. But no, my gosh, no. When that thing was being proposed, it's like, oh my gosh, there's going to be no parking. You know, the traffic is going to be horrible. You know, it'd be something right out of, you know, some crazy, you know, Alfred Hitchcock movie. But no, when it was done, people were like, oh, you know, this isn't so bad. And unfortunately, that's what happens with most of these projects. It's like when something happens, it's like, wow, it's going to destroy the city. And then 2 years later, you know, that we've moved on from that, and now we're, you know, trying to kill a dog park. So, you know, it's that sort of thing. What's the crisis du jour for folks that want to rant and rave? So yeah, so that's what happened with
Well,
the
cool. We've got an example now.
Yes.
Okay, so the update housing needs periodically, is this something that you would just put on the calendar in your office, or is this something you have to persuade council to?
We're required to do it by the state. They actually ask for an inventory each year, but I mean, that's part of, I mean, we're hoping to set the baseline through all this exercise and data collection that we're doing now. So it's actually fresh. It can be tracked a lot easier. The county system is not extremely easy to, it's not very easy to use. We're relying on their building department because they do the building reviews and then they track things with building permits, and it's not easy to sort through that. So there's several layers here. One is like that we have a better baseline, a fresher baseline, so we're not struggling so much with that process, but then also like being like, how are we doing towards achieving these things, which is like, you know, what has the success been? And that's part of what the state's interested in, is like not the grade again, not the scorecard necessarily, like you failed on this and we're going to give you an F, but rather like, how did you do, you know, like more incentive, you know, basis, like, you know, we're not penalizing you because, you know, you haven't necessarily met what we believe you should have done, but rather like, this is a check for us to say, you know, how are we doing?
So it's actually, it's internal to you and more of a, as far as the city is concerned, a personnel issue.
It is, but I think it needs to be, I think we need to clearly communicate and keep the conversation alive, because I think planning is not the most interesting topic unless you have a development next to you. It seems like that's kind of the general gist of the situation. It's not something that you bring up at a party that like, hey, I do this, you know, like it's not a topic du jour necessarily. So it's like, it's one of those that the council, though, and the newspaper and the public and all the citizenry need to be more engaged with and understand what that means to them and how that influences, you know, them. I think that's part of this as well, is just keeping that fresh, so that like, here's how we're doing. And like, by the way, you remember 2 years ago or 3 years ago or whatever that was, we adopted this. And because people have a tendency to forget stuff.
Yeah. Well, I was just curious as to how many other people you needed to drag along, but I think that and Z5, both of those, I think if you can keep those entirely in your department, just so that they don't end up falling off of some budgetary table in the future, I think it's, you know, squirrels and shiny things, you know.
Well, and some of this has been this whole like debate over are the PSU numbers low, you know, and again, they are what they are. We have no control over that. We have zero control over that. That's been adopted. They are the keepers of that. There's no low, medium, and high forecast. We get their one forecast. Like other states, you get to choose. You don't get to choose in Portland. Or for the Portland model, you don't get to choose that. It's a number we've been given. Perhaps that number's low. You know, maybe it's totally right. But that's the other part of this, is where are we at consumption-wise? You know, if we're halfway through a 20-year period and like, you know, most of the land's been absorbed yet again, probably time to look at that again. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that could even just be as simple as reporting back to this body more on what is the status of our progress on some of those metrics. and council. Rather than us just shooting off some data to PSU,
Which
you
kind of
know.
goes into a vacuum and like you guys never see it.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, we know we sent it off, but like no one else has seen that. And like, so it's, you know, like some of the council members are great. Like they keep bringing stuff up. Like, you know, they're doing all this mathematics in the background about things. And I mean, that comes to light in that fashion. I think planning staff should be coming forward, as Brian's saying, more frequently with updates versus, you know, somebody, you know, trying to have to create that on their own. We should be providing that.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, Commissioner Jarosh?
Yeah, I think this is good. This one, when I first saw it, it felt kind of inwardly facing. So, we're reaching out to the community, and then we're talking to property owners and developers, but where is there an ongoing check with other communities and who's doing this successfully and what other custom housing or other people doing? I don't know how we do that as a city.
And I think that, great question. I would say that would be part of this as well. I mean, we obviously, you know, are looking at this. I mean, cities talk to other cities, cities borrow code from other cities. We go to conferences and, you know, our staff goes to conferences and we learn about what the cutting edge items are. So all important, all those elements. And again, Commissioner Jarosh just reporting that back, I think is important as well. You know, especially if there's success in another community that like they did something slightly different and this worked really well for them.
Yeah, so maybe to me, Z5 is education for property owners, developers, and the city.
Yep.
Okay.
Anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay. For me, this looks good, but I just want to make sure to expand. So update housing needs periodically. I am all for that. I love the idea of bringing check-ins and updates back to these bodies on a regular basis. But I'm hoping that the other part of this is that by doing that, it is already starting to lay the groundwork and the preparation for the next plan in 20 years. Because how out of date is our current plan?
38 years old.
Correct. That's ridiculous. So my hope is that we've learned our lesson, and as part of the tools that are built into this is to say in year, 16, we start to work with the budget and start setting aside money for these plans, and where are we at, and how, and to start to lay the groundwork for the process when this all comes back up again. I'm assuming that is going to be built into that as well.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, the whole reason we're going through this process is to not just put it on a shelf, and like forget about it. I think that's essential. And periodically, most jurisdictions are going through some sort of update to their comp plan about every 7 or 8 years. I mean, that's part of this. And, you don't start at year 7 or year 8. You're starting at year 4.
Great.
I mean, that's really kind of more what you should be doing, and that's what I'd like us to be doing. Yeah.
Love it. Okay.
Chair Patton.
Oh, yeah.
So just to dovetail on that, is that something that city council can put into City of Canby's SOP, that regardless of, what the last plan was, that every 10 years this plan gets reviewed? Is that something in their purview to say, hey, we want to, issue a directive to the city planner, to the city staff that every 10 years or whatever it is, that this review take place?
I think we can ask them to support that.
Okay.
I mean, I think and that kind of gets us back onto this cadence, this rhythm that we
Yep.
probably have lost track of. I mean, it's it's been so long that people are like, it's like starting over to some degree. I mean, and then people are like, why do we even have to plan? Well, like, no, I mean, it really is like kind of like that way. And it's like, well, because it
insane.
would be your reality, your community would be horribly worse without your input and your guidance.
Right.
That's the answer.
What drives me crazy about that statement is that people come in here and rail on about how they don't like this and they don't like that. Well, that's how you get into the situation that you are in. It's because this has not been done. And shame on me for not knowing about it back when I was on city council 10 years ago. Because if I could go into the Wayback Machine and smack myself across the face and say, Jason, you need to start bringing this up, because I did not know. So no, I think, and how I think what ties in with yours is as far as like where for the city council, it has to be tied back to their goals, because the city council sets their goals, and somehow the city administration needs to ensure that they tie this cadence to one of their goals and drive that forward. So as the city council changes, this plan has the mechanism to make sure that the update is on the council's radar through their goals.
And
Is that right?
I love what you just said, because right now that everything we're doing is council goal. There's a goal behind everything we're doing now. So keeping the goals fresh, that takes staff though to like continue to say, here's what we would like this should to be, and forwarding that through Scott Archer, our administrator. That's part of that process.
Okay. And then as far as education for property owners and developers, I like Commissioner Jaroch's recommendation for the city as well. But for property owners, I would like to look at not just property, like large property owners or people who are going to be developing their property, but property owners that are coming into the city and buying a home, and what is going to happen around my home? What is the potential to happen around my home? I've purchased a house. There's a forest in its backyard. Is it always going to be a forest? What could that forest turn into? You know, I think for me, I would like to see that the city give those folks the tools to figure out what that is, so that in the future, for planning commissioners that sit up here and citizens are in the seats ranting or raving about the fact that they bought their house, X number of years ago, and now all of a sudden there's going to be a warehouse behind them and how unfair that is. Here's the tools to understand what could happen in your area. And we have provided them to you. If you choose not to use them, that is your prerogative, but we have educated you, and I'm sorry you feel that way. And any way that the city can help extend the olive branch to these folks to educate them, I think is paramount.
And I think the real estate community is a big player in that too.
Yes.
It's about giving them the tools to forward some of that information to their buyers, because obviously there's a lot of information exchange during that process, but some of these bigger land use things kind of get lost. Yeah. And then people are surprised.
And I can tell you, being married to a realtor, you can express those details 1,000 times, and 10 years from now, are they gonna, is that, in other words, I can tell you right now what this land is zoned for. This is on a property disclosure, right? It tells you what the land is zoned for, but what does that mean to that individual 10 years from now? And how are they able to predict what one owner may do whenever, right, at some point down the road? It's really difficult. And that's the part I was interested to hear more about, is how would we engage with the real estate community? Because I also feel for the folks that, and to what is the extent of the responsibility of this body and city council in terms of that education piece? I mean, they can see what it's zoned as, They can see it on their property disclosures and the MLS, how it's zoned. Is there a zoning outreach flyer thing that is it a mailer campaign? I'm being a little facetious, but like, hey, know your zones. Like, is that kind of what we're talking about, is know your zone, and understand what that means?
I could see having like an evening workshop maybe once a year or something where we reach out to all the people in the local real estate community and just kind of bring them in and have like a little workshop where we just kind of go over what's in our comp plan and stuff like that, where it's just like a low pressure thing where they can meet us and we get to beat them. And I think something like that would be pretty cool.
That would be cool.
Yeah, and I think like, I don't know, I mean, I don't know what those tools are for just the common homeowner to be able to research this stuff. I know for me, when I bought my house, there was a field behind it, and I knew that it was not going to be a field for long. But because I'm familiar with the city, and I don't know if I like overstepped my bounds when I did this, I came into the city hall and I asked them. I said, "Hey, I'm looking at purchasing this house. There is a field behind it. What's going on back there?" And they printed out a map of what the future development would look like. So when I had all of my housing stuff there, it's like, okay, there's going to be a rotary behind, there's going to be not a rotary, but a cul-de-sac bulb behind me, and there's going to be a house like right lined up with mine. And it was made very clear that this could change. This is just the preliminary plan. But, I don't know if every citizen in the community knows that might be an option. It might not be an option. I don't know if we want every single person coming in and requesting that map from planning staff. Can we make it easier to find that tool and provide those tools online so that people can do it? That's kind of what I'm getting at, is making sure that we like go overkill on the tools to a point to help so that it alleviates some of that tries to alleviate some of that tension.
All I'm saying, Mr. Potter, is if you hashtag know your zone, I get credit for that. And that would be on a t-shirt.
Absolutely.
Know your zone campaign.
I like it.
I said.
That is a good one. Okay, so so that's all I really had as far as an expansion on those. Okay, so is there another?
I think that was really great input. I think that was our last slide there.
Okay.
Just as an educational piece, like more stuff coming. I think this helpful, so you guys are not like, where did all this information come from? And like this, you can go home and like think through this and digest it. And like, if you have other thoughts that come about, there'll be other opportunities for that as well. Again, these are framework. These are, we're establishing a framework to help us have tools to hopefully help us address growth, housing, affordability, where people are going to live and work, what kind of employment, those kinds of things. These are all kind of intended for that.
Okay. So is there anything, just before we move on, is there anything that any of the members of the Planning Commission had pop into their head as we've talked about other ones? Anything like that for the good of the order for this one?
I still think the estimate's low.
Oh, the population estimate? Well, that'll be some other Planning Commission's problem. Which we're at least getting the ball. At least the ball is over the net.
Yeah.
Once it's in their court in 10 years, they can sort that out. And quite frankly, if they are reviewing this on a regular basis, they will catch that error, right? Because how often is that number updated from PSU?
Well, there's going to be a new number coming out like July 1, 2024. And that's the next round. Yeah.
So I think, by putting in those triggers to say, hey, we need to look at this, that is what's gonna pave the way for, instead of the folks on the other side of the court not knowing where the ball is or coming from the other side, they're at least gonna have an idea and can play it. So Sorry, I still have volleyball on the brain, so I'm using that as an analogy. Yes, Ryan.
I do think the PSU's estimate is larger than the U.S. Census current estimate, so that's good at least. The PSU is looking at some more fine-grained information than the census. Because a lot of places do everything based on the census estimate, the rolling 3 or 5 year one, so if that's worth anything.
Well, and I think, and this might sound a little harsh, but reality can be that way. As we've talked about, a lot of the people who have moved into our community within the last 8 years or so are folks that are as part of an aging population. And because we really don't have that aging in place infrastructure here, I foresee in 10 to 15 years, there's going to be a dramatic shift, at least in my opinion, there's going to be a dramatic shift of folks that are either dying or that are moving out of the community into assisted living facilities or into with their children or whatever to be taken care of. And so there's going to be this hiccup. And so those houses will be vacated and then they will be available for someone else coming in. And I think that might be, my assumption is that maybe that's some of what that is catching. I don't know. We'll see. I'd like to be proven wrong. It's awesome. Okay, so with that, I think we're done with that one. What else do you got for us, Don?
Moving on to the items, can we move on to number 5 on the agenda, or did you want to? I think we've covered this adequately tonight.
I would hope so. My
Yeah.
gosh.
So I was just going to suggest.
I
moving to
overheard
item
you
5.
guys talk about short meeting over there, and I almost laughed at you. I'm like, are you kidding? What are you talking about over there? Okay.
So item 5.
So we're done with the work session?
We are, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close the work session, and we're going to go on to item 5, which is items of interest and report from the planning staff.
And hopefully this is a short one. It will be short on my end anyway.
Okay,
But,
we'll see what happens.
We just wanted to follow up from the last planning commission hearing, specifically in the long discussion regarding traffic. And just to let you know that was heard. In addition to the other items for housing and economic, we will also be doing transportation system plan updates to the planning commission. So we've talked to DKS, who will be the consultant on the team. They're doing the transportation side of things, along with 3J, who's the lead on the land use. So that there'll be discussions on standards and also on discussions about how traffic evaluations are done now and the standards process that we're moving forward. The idea behind this is to give more information to the planning commission members so that it's more understandable. Traffic studies can be complex. They can be challenging if one does not have that educational background. That's why we hire them as experts. But I just wanted to also mention that that is something we're anticipating. I'm hoping that like by early spring we have something. It may be sooner than that, but essentially that's the targeting. What I'm looking for is having some discussion around that so that we clearly can have more information that will hopefully get to the elements that are important to the planning commissioners. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that is something we've discussed internally, and just wanted to mention that.
Excellent. And then something that also came out of that conversation was doing some sort of work session or getting a comprehensive update from Canby Utility as far as the capacity for both water and electric here in the city. Because that seems to be coming up more as a concern for commissioners. And I think that Canby Utility is the best. Like if Canby Utility says that they have capacity for this, then we need to trust that that they are the experts in this and that they know what they're talking about. But if there's a way to drive that point home to folks here on the planning commission, I think that would be beneficial.
And I'm happy to reach out to Canby Utility, and just, by the way, that is an element of the comp plan as well. I mean,
Sure.
dealing with water and, electricity, those things. Let me at least have that conversation. I'm not sure exactly what that discussion would look like, but at least I could have that interface with them to say, maybe the question is, are there concerns about adequacy, and what would those be?
There are concerns because Commissioner Ewert has brought up the fact that he does not think that there is enough. He is concerned about the capacity of bringing more houses into our current water system. And so if there is a way for Canby Utility to say, this is the long-range plan that we have that this is how we are going to accommodate this growth, I think that would be beneficial to this group.
And I think I know they're updating their master plan, their water system master plan. And maybe that would be the element of like, hey, just give us, can I, have you show up and do a 20-minute and then Q&A, after that or whatever that is, just to say, here's an update to our water system plan. Here's where it's at. That actually would be beneficial for planning as well. Because, I know that they're doing it, but I don't know the details either.
Okay.
So,
And is the commission thinking that wastewater too would be interesting to hear from them as well?
Yeah, wastewater obviously would be a different one because that's a city thing, not Canby Utility.
But I'm thinking if we had a workshop, maybe that was the subject, then maybe we could have both of them
wastewater,
come.
Yeah. So I think that would be beneficial for folks here. Okay. And it might be something where those sort of updates and those sort of communications need to happen on a regular basis as the makeup of this body changes, like over time. Because then as new people come in, they haven't heard that shtick. So it might be good to do that. Okay. Commissioner Jarosh, did you have something to add to that? It looked like you were trying to speak. No? Okay, and were you unmuting yourself or something? No?
No.
Yes, but I wisely refrained.
Oh, okay. Oh, no. Okay, so that's good. Anything else?
That was really pretty much it on that part of it. And
Okay.
I can jump into B. Ryan will be giving the next work session December 12th on fencing. Coming back next round on this, moving that forward and getting more information on that. There are a number of hearings that will be scheduled in possibly January. I'm not sure, January, February. We don't have those completely secured. There's some applications that are not 100% there, but there should be some hearing items as well that I don't have those at this point because there's this fully complete and people are different places in their application process, but we'll keep you updated on that.
Considering in the spring, we were talking about how we might have to have extra meetings in July and August because there were going to be a crush of things and that didn't happen. You just keep us posted. It'll be what it'll be.
Yep.
I think that's fair.
Well, and it's turned out that we're doing a lot more of the comp plan and housing, and there's not a lack of stuff going on.
Oh yeah, no, it's good. Okay, so anything else from planning staff?
Brian, anything? No, I think we're good.
Okay, is there anything from members of the planning commission? Commissioner Ellison is shaking his head no. Commissioner Jarosh?
I have a nit. I'd like the consultants to make sure their PowerPoints have page numbers on them. That should be our standard as a city.
On PowerPoint, Commissioner Jarosh, you have an example?
Yeah. I didn't see page numbers on tonight's PowerPoint.
On the PowerPoint. Okay, got it. Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Hutchinson? Okay. For me, I just wanted to let folks know that in an effort to fill out this board, I have met or have meetings. I've met, so for those that did not prevail in our recent election for city council, I have met with two of the individuals that did not win and encouraged them and had very lengthy conversations with them regarding what this group does and encouraging them to apply. I have a meeting with another individual later this week, and one individual is being very elusive, and I have not been able to nail them down to have such a meeting. So I have met with those folks to encourage them, if they were willing to make a commitment to be a city councilor. It is a similar time commitment to be a planning commissioner, and this is the sales pitch for everybody in TV land tonight that is tuning in, the tens of you, that planning commission, while it is not a governing body and it does not create policy, if you really want to have a say in how things are going to be done here in Canby for the future, the Planning Commission finds itself in a very interesting position in that it is being included in all of these plans and studies. And so in its 38-year history and in its 20-some year future, this is the time when, being a planning commissioner, you will actually be able to have some say in how the policy is created. So if that is a carrot to entice folks to join this group because they will actually have some say in the matter, then there is the carrot, come and bite it. So that's that. I assume that at our next meeting, we're going to talk about canceling the December 26th meeting. I know I'm crazy, but I wouldn't expect us to meet the day after Christmas.
Holiday, so I believe
Yeah.
it's observed. Yeah, so no, we will not be having a PC.
Okay, do we have to vote to cancel that on a future agenda, or it's just going to be canceled?
It's a holiday.
Okay, well, I just want to make sure our bases are covered. Okay, so that one we're not going to be doing. And I think, work with Canby Utility. Yeah, I think that was it for me. Anything else for the good of order? Okay, with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
It has been moved by Commissioner Ellison and seconded by Vice Chair Hutchinson to adjourn tonight's meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? It is unanimous, and so we are adjourned. Have a wonderful evening, Canby. Be sure, if you are interested in applying for a position, either reach out to me, the city, or check out our website and go forth. And I hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Have a good night.